to EGM722, Week 2, Part 4, Classes and Objects. In last week's lectures, we discussed the fact that Python is an object-oriented programming language. And an object, at the time I defined this as just the basic sort of thing that Python is working with. And we said that objects have something called a type, they have properties or attributes, and they have something called methods associated with them. So today we're going to talk about how Python actually creates objects. And we'll start by talking about something called a class. And a class is simply a blueprint that tells Python how to create an object. So you see here this snippet of code that shows the definition of a class called shape, different methods associated with that. You notice that the class it starts off with a header, very much the same that functions start off with a header, or loops that we discussed last week. So we have the class keyword and then a colon ending it. So this class that we're defining also defines the different methods that are associated with the class, and we also tell Python how to set or describe the different attributes that this class should have. The init, and this is 2 underscores before, followed by init, followed by 2 underscores after. So remember, this is a magic or special method, and this is what actually tells Python how to build the new object. So you see here that we have an init method. It is passing a keyword called self. So this is just telling Python to do this on the object that is calling the method. We then pass a parameter called length, a parameter called width, and then Python says, okay, well, that object, I set the attribute length to be whatever the length was that was passed to the init method. Same thing with the width, and then I set an attribute called description that is a string that just tells the user how many whatever long the shape is and however many whatever wide the shape is. And then we have the other methods that we're defining here, like area, perimeter, and scale. So remember that a method is just a function, again, that is operating on an object, on whatever object is calling that method. So for example, we saw the method upper for strings changes all of the characters in that string to be uppercase. So attributes, on the other hand, again, are variables that belong to a particular object. They describe the object. And there are 2 different kinds of attributes that you might need to worry about. The first is something called an instance attribute, and that belongs only to that particular instance or that particular object. And there is something called a class attribute, and this is an attribute that is shared by all of the instances of a class. So the class is only providing the blueprint for how to create the object. In order to actually create the object, we need to tell Python what to do. And in this case, we're passing different parameters like length and width to create the shape. And then once we do that, we can see that we access the different attributes like description, which prints out a description of the shape. We can calculate the area using the area method. We can calculate the perimeter of our shape using the perimeter method. And we can also use the scale method to scale the shape by whatever number we pass it to. And you see that once we have used the scale method, if we look then at the description again, it has changed. We now see that the shape is 200 long as opposed to 100 long when we started. And you can also see that the area has changed and the perimeter of the shape has changed as well. So one question for you to think about is this class mutable? which is to say, once we have created the class, are we able to change the attributes or change the object in order, or once we have created it, or do we have to, similar to strings, create a whole new string? So something to think about as we move on to talk about inheritance. So let's say we want to define a new class called square. Now we could write everything from scratch, so we could write an init method, we could write a method to calculate the area of our square, a method to calculate the perimeter of our square, and on, but you'll notice that there's a lot of overlap there. So we can use something called inheritance to define our new class by simply modifying the existing class that we want to sort of build off of. So you see that definition here. We have our class square, and then in parentheses we have shape, the original class that we're working with. And so what this is telling Python is to take all of the different methods and attributes associated with shape and make sure that square has the ability to access those as well. So now we have to define a new init method where instead of passing a length and a width, we're only passing a width. And then we call the init method of our super class or our parent class in order to create the object. So that's it. That's the entire definition of our square class. We then see that because this is the child class that is inheriting everything from the parent class, it has all of the methods, all of the attributes of the parent class. So here you see that if we create a square using the init method for our square class here, we still have a description, even though we haven't explicitly defined it. We still have an area method, even though we haven't explicitly defined it, and so on. So all of those methods that we defined in shape are passed to the square class when it is created. And so we avoid duplicating lots of code. This is very similar to functions where rather than copying and pasting something and reusing it over and over, where then if we decide we need to update something, we have to go in and change it everywhere. We can use this to only define certain methods in one place, and then they get updated whenever we need to change them in just the one place that we've defined them. When we're using this sort of structure, when we're using inheritance to create a class like this, we only need to explicitly write the methods that are different from the parent class. So to sum all of this up, remember Python is an object-oriented programming language. The class constructor provides a blueprint for Python to actually create objects that we can then use in our programs. The class defines the different attributes and methods that the object is going to have. And we can use something called inheritance to create new classes without starting completely from scratch. So that's all I have for this lesson. I hope you found it interesting and useful. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them to the discussion forum on Blackboard. Thanks. Bye.